Good evening and welcome to the CAP Hotbox. I think most of you know our speaker tonight. Probably like me, most of you or many of you have read John Halldane's articles, etc. over the past. I might mention that after reading and following his work for some time, was very fortunate this summer to meet John at a meeting in Williamsburg. Of course, everyone is nice in Williamsburg, but it was a real pleasure to spend 2 days there working with him, and really I should say fighting with him, because the debates were endless. For those of you that are not familiar with his background, maybe I should touch on a few points. John has a degree in science from the University of New Zealand. He has an undergraduate degree in architecture from Auckland in New Zealand. He has a town planning master's degree, also from New Zealand. And he has a PhD in architecture, also from New Zealand. In addition to the academic background or the degrees and to the many articles that he's written, John has taught at Berkeley, University of Sydney, University of British Columbia, and he is presently a lecturer at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. In addition to his architectural work, he was with the Bureau of Standards in Washington for a number of years, and with the forerunner of what is now the Department of Energy. John's research is almost endless. In fact, I'm not sure just how many areas his research covers. I do know that he has 4 children. I would like to introduce to you Dr. John Halldane. Okay, on with the fishtail. Now, well, it's good to be back amongst a few more architects and other people interested in environmental design. Tonight, our interest is people and their environment, and some of the other implications that go along with that, including such things as the federal government, government agencies, water authorities, financiers, contractors, specifiers, and everybody else concerned with the building industry. Well, where do we get started? The whole premise for design is essentially for people. Anybody can test that particular up in the gods there or anywhere? Any other ideas about architectural design? One of the basic premises is that we're designing for people. Even when we design for an industrial process, it is what the people think of that process that we're designing for. So you can't leave the human factor out of the equation of design. The other thing that polarizes design and tends to put people into different sorts of camps is our attitude towards design. I guess some of you have heard of heuristic design, and some of you have heard of determinate design. If you've done anything on Aristotelian logic, you think of it in terms of inductive logic or deductive logic. Then you think, well, what in the world has that got to do with us? We seem to learn about these things of logic and design, and they don't seem very relevant to anything.
Well, it comes out in the studio. First of all, in the studio, we try and create something out of nothing. We give an architectural program and say, here, design it. And somehow or other, there's a human being in that process, and we're designing for people. I was in the studio this afternoon, we're designing for a community of people, and we have a mixture. Some old ones, some young ones, and a mixture. The next thing is that we create ideas essentially from nothing beyond our own experience as designers. And it's a wonderful gift that an architectural school can foster this creativeness. It is a process of putting down ideas, crystallizing it, and expressing it in various ways in designing in the studio. Now there's a stage where you have to communicate those things and put them down in some reality to communicate it to other people. Because not everybody thinks the same way you do as designers. And that's where we get the problem. And we get the determinate part of the design. Having got a creative entity, then we can evaluate it in other terms. And it's this type of duality of going between creativeness and evaluation that has tended to split the architectural profession in many ways. It's split the architects between themselves and engineers. Now it's splitting engineers between scientists. We have now splits between the consultants for economics and now the legal profession in terms of legislation. Where does the architect fit into this big mess? Well, the essence is that we have to start again that our business is designing for people. We have to create environments, and we have to understand those environments for people. But in our process, we have to communicate, and we have to see that those ideas are acceptable within the community, because our art is also a social art, and that makes it quite distinct from painting and sculpture, that we are responsible for our entities in a community. We just can't put up things and say that that's it, and that it's designing for one group of people. Because this building itself is a part of Muncie. It's created here as an entity, a part of the campus and then to the greater whole. So how do we link that creativeness and those ideas of people to be also compatible to the design creation and also to the analysis of other groups of analytical types? It's quite a challenge in our technological society to include these things. So over a number of years I have been trying to think, well, how in the world can we try and put pieces together? Try this thing. No, that doesn't work. All right. Okay. For the moment, we'll deal with the problem of evaluation, putting things together. I'll assume that we have a design. Then I'll go back and go into the problem of human responses. But for the moment, let's consider we have some environmental and human problems to deal with in design. And we find in the process, if this thing doesn't kink up altogether, that we have an environment which I've stated as a category, a group of parameters to deal with in design at the bottom. We have light, sound, air, surfaces, transportation, all those things that we're familiar with. That's our environment about us. On the other hand, we have a human being at the top which has physiological responses. The metabolism, the respiration, our breathing, those things. An environment has to support those things. Now, we also have behavioral responses, so those that we can outwardly see, our breathing when we hear, our bodily motions, and so on. Then there are the ones that are within us, that we can't tap into, and those are our perceptual. And the perceptual cues then provide things that we have cognition, our cognitive responses. Those are the ones that we think about. So we have a range of responses to deal with in design of a human being in space. The key thing that we can have a myriad of parameters to deal with people and a myriad of parameters to deal with the environment. Heat, light, sound, various space, but there are a group of parameters that link between the two. Now, in contrast to, say, Chris Alexander or those others that you've from other schools who put forward a broad group of categories, I try and group them into linkages, correlations, because it's in that way that we can analyze the problems later on. And that's what makes it compatible with the analytical disciplines. So we have a group then that we, as a creator, if we know the parameters of design, then that can help us create an environment for people. On the other hand, we know that certain of these parameters are going to only correlate in certain ways. So we have certain distributions of light that form a stimulus for our human responses. And it's that stimulus group that is the center of our disciplines for our environmental design of relating a person to their space. Okay, now let's accelerate the process a little bit. We have a person in an environment. Now, one of the key things, this is one on all the paper that I had given some time ago, the idea we have a person is a pole in space. Now, our perceptions and vision are angles. We don't see distance. We don't see distance at all. We see angles. And as I move my position in space, those angles change. As I hear things in the environment, I get closer to a wall, it sounds louder because of the reverberation of that space is greater towards the surfaces because of the reflection from that surface. So we've got basic changes of a person in an environment. A view from a window, for instance, is rather important. You can see out and you've got a view. Now, a lot of people have studied views from windows and tried to decide whether they support activities or not. And some groups of people say, no, it doesn't matter. Well, it depends on what experimental conditions you do to find out the answers. If you just test whether a person can write, whether the thermal environment is right, or whether the acoustics is right, then that's not asking the questions of whether a view is satisfactory to support. And you'll find that if you go back to some of the basic behavioral experiments that have been done, those are the questions that haven't been answered or posed in the experimental work. But the experimental work is true in terms of the bounds they've set the experiment. Now, as designers, our problem is how far do we go in understanding those experiments so that we can interpolate that information to help us design, to be a discipline in our design, to make our design more rational, that we can communicate it with others and to ourselves. And those are some of the basic questions. How far do we go? So we're bringing the psychological or behavioral sciences into architecture. Well, my question there is, those that are relevant and conform disciplines in design to help you model a better environment are the ones that we use. And we find that those disciplines tend to be self-evident. If they're not self-evident, then they can't be perceived, and they can't be used in design. Now that's fairly extreme in attitude, but I think if you follow it through and want to use the other sciences, or the arts, creative, sculpture, painting, in design, answer those questions. How do they help you create an environment? And then how do they help you analyze it? Okay. So we have a basic thing with a human being in space. It's a polar space from the human point of view, but from the physical space from the engineer's point of view, it is a Cartesian space, x, y, z coordinates, as distinct from angular coordinates for the human being. Now, it's this fundamental difference in space or relationships that are generally not introduced into the behavioral sciences. And the qualities of a person moving about a space are often lost because that transition is not understood. Okay. Now let's go over some of the influences. Now this is going to be hard because it's a large diagram and I've got it in two parts. Now this is going to be a bit hard to read, so I'll go over it. This will be in a paper that will be it's being printed this month in the construction specifier. And on the left-hand side here, I've got basically the same categorization I had in that other chart. I've got environmental distribution parameters down in this area, going through to the cognitive responses, physiological and cognitive responses. Now I've gone through each of the sensors. The vision there, in this area we've got vision, and here we have the environment. Now generally the illumination, or the lighting engineer is concerned with illumination of surfaces. And he has a measure. It's illumination, foot candles on a surface. Now I'm saying that illumination on a surface has no correlation with a human response whatsoever, because it is the luminance from the surface that counts in vision. It's not what the light is on the surface, because I can get a self-luminous object. I can have a dark window at night and measure the illumination on that dark window, but then it looks black. It's because to correlate with human response in that particular case is luminance. Now, having understood that that's the light from an object that counts in vision, it goes through a sensory process and ends up, and it only correlates with one perceptual response, and that's luminosity, or it used to be called apparent brightness, or brightness in the psychology textbooks. So we have a perceptual thing called brightness or luminosity. I'm not going to call it brightness because there's a confusion in the engineering texts of what it is. But it's a human response that cannot be measured in physical terms. It is a non-physical entity. Perception is a non-physical entity. So what we have to do in perception studies is to set or give instructions to a person to look for things. Either look for the lightness of a colour, the hue of a colour, or the saturation. And that's how we define colour. So there's not much sense in talking about, oh, that colour over there. Because if it's a yellow colour, it could be a saturated one, it could be a greeny yellow, or it could be light or dark in tone. So if we are a lighting engineer just concerned with correlations of illumination on a surface, like the Illuminating Engineering Society, then we have to then specify the nature of the surface. Its reflection characteristics, diffusion in space, all those other things, before we have an understanding of what goes towards the observer. And if you look at the psychology text, you will find luminance is the key measure of correlates with vision for the amount of light that a person sees. And in the engineering world, it's illumination on surfaces. Now, both camps are relevant. It's a matter of understanding the relationship between the two. And that's where we get into the engineering and environmental sciences of understanding those relationships. And indeed, this is what the architect needs to know. What are the characteristics of surface that if I've got a certain amount of light in certain directions on a surface, what comes off? And what do I see? And when I see it, what sort of excitement does it give me for the things I'm doing? And it's those relationships that we want to encourage. And yet behind it, someone has to go into the details of deciding how much, specifying it, specifying the luminaires and the space. It's either you or the engineer. And the question in our profession at the present moment is, when we consider lighting, acoustics, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, the planning of offices, we get to a stage that we're delegating all our responsibilities. And the question is, what are we going to end up as professionals designing? And it's a serious problem. It's happening with other professions too, the problem with a consultant and where to place them. The point is, when you delegate responsibility to a consultant, you still have to understand what that consultant is doing and how it's affecting your design. So if you have a structural engineer, you must understand what comes back in a structure. Because finally, you are responsible. There are all the stories of responsibility. First of all, the architect gets it. I remember a building in Mexico fell over. The architect was put into jail. He was the first one. Then somehow or other we had to get someone to get him out and put the responsibility onto the engineer. There was a foundation engineer who was finally responsible. But the law in the community doesn't see it that way. It's the architect who gets it if he is the coordinating person, the overall designer. Now, as students of architecture or as professionals, how far are we going to delegate this? And how far are we going to be responsible? One way of looking at it, for instance, an office block that we might design, if you think of it in terms of monetary responsibility, about a quarter might go to the architect, a quarter to the structural engineer, and about half of it to the building services. And it's a very important thing to reflect, because the outside world who is looking at us, our clients, see it in those terms, not the designer's terms. Now, as designers, somehow we have to make that transition into the eyes of owners, clients, people responsible for setting up the building program. Okay, now here we have other responses that we're dealing with. Auditory channels, we have sounds in the environment, voice communications. We want privacy in some cases. We want to be able to project sound on others. For instance, in this space, I have to use this device so that you people can hear. Now, would you ever conceive of that in an opera theatre? Not that I have a voice to go with an opera, but anyway. It's certain situations, particularly stage, you can't tolerate this as a device. So we still need to know the art of designing a hall or a theatre for that type of production, a stage production. Indeed, it's good if we can create lecture theatres that don't need this sort of thing as well. Okay, so we have other responses that we're dealing with. We have olfactory. Now we have some experiences that we've seen some strange things when we go around, particularly department stores. At the main entrance, how often do you find a perfume counter alongside a popcorn counter? Have you ever thought of going along a street and going past or even in a grocery store where you've got the fish, where you've got these live lobsters crawling around, and the smell from that water, which is never too fresh in my experience. Somehow we still buy them because we consider those wobbly things moving around still live. And alongside it, what do we got? Vegetables in some cases. Fruit. Quite a different smell. Now, I ask that even in those sort of situations, that we as designers have to come to grips with the compatibility of certain olfactory responses that are consistent with the planning and design of the spaces. or else they become incongruous. It's not just a matter of functional design. That used to be about a decade ago, everybody would harp on the word functional. Architecture had to be functional and everything. Well, I believe that architecture has to reinforce behavioral experiences in space. That, I believe, is the basic aesthetic. It means that things that if you need to hate a space for some reason, and indeed in emergency situations, if you don't want a person to go in to a situation, you can make that an undesirable space so that people don't go in there voluntarily. In fact, we had a situation in British Columbia. We did some experimental work on how do you get people out of a lecture theatre when there is a fire. If there's a fire alarm now, what would you do? Any ideas? What would you do if there's a fire alarm? Where would you people go? All right, it says exit up there. Where does that lead to? I think the majority of you people, if you heard an alarm, you just stay still, and that will be it. Until you saw a fire. And then when you saw a fire, you'd really associate it with something rather than get moving. The other end of the story is that if you're in a high-rise office, 60 floors up, and you heard a fire alarm, what do you think you'd do then? I'm sure I wouldn't go down by the staircase 60 floors until I was pretty damn sure the building was fire. So these are cognitive aspects of one's behaviour, the understanding of our perceptions, fire alarms, voice communications, things like that. Just as important in design. In that particular case, we did some experimental work and we flickered the light in the space. And it did move people out because they couldn't work or do anything in that space. So they voluntarily went because there was no use staying there. It was undesirable, particularly if you pulse it 3 cycles a second. You've got to be careful because if there are any epileptics there, you'll find that they'll keel over and froth at the mouth because they respond physiologically in that way. In fact, I was doing some physics experiments once and I had one of these vibrating strings and I was twanging it and showing people all the wave motions along and under a stroboscopic light. Then there was a plonk on the floor behind me. And the first time I had come across it, the person was epileptic and he said, well, it was only after 3 or 4 flickers and he was out. So, fortunately, he had his prescription with him and I knew what to do after that. But it's a rather frightening experience. So, the other thing in that particular experimental work on egress from fires was that we found that people, when they went out of the lecture theatre, went towards light. And this was in British Columbia, and the lecture theatre we were experimenting with had 2 choices, one outside and one to an interior courtyard because there was glass around it. A quarter of the students went out into that courtyard which had no exit, because the movement towards light was greater than all the instructions to get out of the building and through the main entrance where a number of other people were leaving. So this is the importance of phototropism as a response to an environment, orientation towards light. Okay, well, we'll get to that one again later. Now, I'll go on to very briefly and don't try and read this. All I want to do is to emphasize the complicated process of the sensory process. If at the top I've got a simple black and white division in space, a pattern in space, it's just simple. On the eye it's projected as a stimulus, one luminance, then another luminance, just a step. That's the simplest pattern we can get in space. Then it's transformed. There is scatter in the eye. They call that entoptic scatter. That's the first one. Then it goes down. The neural cells, they tend to diffuse the light. So we get some diffusion within the pattern itself. Then there's a remarkable process that goes in the neural process. One cell tends to fire against another. And that tends to reinforce the neural boundary. So it reinforces the pattern. So we've got another interesting transition. Then the eyes move. They're never steady. They go in saccades over a pattern. So we get another complication in the process down here. And again, the image that one sees is rather a complicated thing compared with that step function up the top there. So, but the key thing that all that process does is it reinforces the boundaries, the separations. Now in design, how often are you confronted with a blank space? Someone labels it concrete, or tiled brickwork, or something like that, and you wonder, oh gosh. Then someone comes along and says, well, I've got to put a faucet on the end for the hose. And then you see suddenly on this blank space a faucet in the middle, and you wonder, why in the world is such an eyesore? Why is it such a mistake? It's because that dark object against that bland surface is emphasized, because it forms a contour in the visual field. And what we find with all our sensory processes, they reinforce the patterns. On the skin, we get the same thing. If you put a pattern of imprint, if we feel things and touch things, the sensory process reinforces it. Reinforces the pattern. Now what use is this idea of this to the designer? What's it telling you? What's it telling you? It's telling you that texture is a very important feature of surfaces in the environment. We don't see broad, luminous surfaces. We don't see them. In fact, if you present that light, and if you just stared at a bland surface, it goes dark, goes grey. It's called a Gansfeld. There's no real perception. You adapt to it, and it doesn't form a stimulus in the environment. Now we can get to the thermal environment. There are two parts of the thermal environment. One is the heat of our body to space. And that's what all the textbooks talk about. The metabolic process of us and the environment. We're a heat generator, and it goes out into space in terms of convection, conduction, radiation, and huffing in the air with all the breath from our respiration. But when we get to sensory perception, it's different from that metabolic state that we were talking about. Metabolism is physiological response. And so, we've got another one to consider, our feeling of warmness and coolness. In fact, there are different receptors in our body that respond to those things. And the correlation for warmness on the skin is the rate of change of that power, thermal power through the skin, not the steady state thermal power that the physiologists have emphasized and projected in all our comfort condition work. All the comfort condition formulas that you're given in the ASHRAE guide and other data handbooks are based on a steady state condition of a person's metabolism in space. As a designer, for people in the environment, that's one issue. But the one that people sense is the change in that environment. So it's a difference between adaptation and our feeling of warmness and coolness and sweatiness. And indeed, some of us know what sweatiness is these days. Okay, now what the hell is the use of worrying about that in design? Well, you'll find that the basic comfort conditions that are given in our work that we'll deal with are based on you're doing some work and they ask you, are you comfortable? And so you're going to set up scales of comfort or discomfort. No other president has come up with federal guidelines for temperature, and most of you have felt those guidelines. They set up the thermostats to 78 degrees, and they stick this building on an economy cycle when the outside temperature gets there. Well, how do you feel about 78 degrees Fahrenheit? Now, you're giving off a lot of moisture here, and so now we're starting to understand what humidity is all about in a space. And how do we deal with humidity? Well, unless we've got the luxury of an office that can provide dehumidification by virtue of its productivity, if you're at home, no one can afford a dehumidifier generally. So what do? You cool, and then everything gets drippy wet at home. In an office, you have to dehumidify to get comfortable. Does that save energy? So the question now is that although raising the temperature in some instances, a particularly domestic case, may save energy, meaning that the outside air doesn't have to be cooled so much in summertime, you're no better off in an office situation which has humidity control. You're dehumidifying, and it creates a heavier load on the central plant. So you're using more energy in some cases. So this is why you find some camps grouping to say, well, let's hold on to some of these federal regulations. How is it really affecting us? Now, do you realize that the federal regulations are requiring certain thermal transmission values for our envelope of our buildings? It means now that we have to design so that the outside envelope has more insulation than it has previously to conserve energy so that you don't have to make up for the heat losses or gains. Well, the consequence of that, as most of you have found in design, you're ending up with sicking your buildings, or sicking up berms, putting in double glazing. Now, but there's another realm of problems of practical issues. And those practical issues are the construction. There's no sense in putting in good insulation if the contractor doesn't seal around it, or doesn't install it correctly, or put the vapor barrier in the right place. Some of the designs we'll find will not have insulation because there'll be condensation, and they'll just drip. And water is not a very good insulator. So that's another range of problems that we'll be dealing with in design. Okay. Now what is this building up to what I'm getting to in terms of progressive specifications? So there's method in my madness for development. Okay. Now some other things in terms of human responses. I'll just go through one or two of them and illustrate through the visual means, because a number of you are architects. And at Berkeley, we did a few experiments. Some of you might even have been involved with these experiments, but these experiments were twofold. One was to make students, or rather allow them to be aware of what was happening, and then to develop a means of analyzing or evaluating them, finding out why they occurred. Well, what we found is we had a series of grey cards and we put them up in order of equal intervals. And we found that this order, the reflectors from the cards, would differently according to the background and to the amount of light. Now you might say, well, what's the use of this? Well, the importance is that we see an environment by virtue of its light and shade, its darkness and lightness. That's the prime way that we see an environment. The next is in terms of the cues of hue, where the ring is a red, yellow, blue hue. And the next thing we see in an environment is by the saturation of that hue in space, whether it's a sort of a brilliant blue, brilliant red, or whatever it is. There are various common gardens names of discussing it. Now the scientists have got more specific terms than that. We won't go into that, but this experiment at the bottom was an interesting one. It took 2 years for some students to create it. The interesting thing is that when you draw it, it's a pattern that causes visual flicker. And it sends you mad. And you might say, well, why do this sort of thing? There are not many cases about that would have this. Well, I was interested in the relationship of this flickering sensation and intermittent light, flashing of light. And we find that the eye movements over this sort of a pattern correlate with the flashing of light as though it was stationary. It means also that the worst cases of flicker are when the on and off are equal, or in this case, where the patterns are equally light and dark. Now, what in the world is the use of that? Well, I haven't got a slide of the Academy of Science in Canberra, Australia. In Canberra, Australia, I'd like you to imagine a world. It had a whole lot of striations of wood paneling behind a screen. Imagine wood paneling behind a screen. And every other one was painted to reinforce the stripes. It sent even scientists mad. It meant that there was some, well, if it sends the Academy of Science mad, it's getting somewhere. But it also meant that, how did they solve it? So the architect did some interesting experiments. So what he did was he made every fourth one grey. It stopped the flicker, but it created another thing. It made it wave in space. So you had a depth perception, making the thing wave, making it flicker, and what next? It was rich in perceptual responses, but not very good to pay any attention to the what was going on in terms of lectures and the august Academy of Science. Well, that's a very specific case, you might say. I mentioned those patterns. Well, this is the most familiar one I think most of you have come across. And that's where you get it in practice. When you get a whole lot of stripes of this nature, you can really get them wild, particularly if you've got a bright, luminous sky behind them, cloudy day, bright clouds, and a light surface. And the good old Holland blind or Venetian blind can really be wild. It can send you. It can even send you at night, because these are on a black background. Because you can either treat it as the negative or the positive. And at certain distances, and it happens to be the eye movements that rotate over about 2 to 6 degrees, that you get the maximum pattern for distances, and when you get equal light and dark. So, it means that we have an analytical tool, understanding that sort of relationship. It gives us an idea of what if we want to send people mad, we have a means of doing it. You don't have to put a person on drugs. In fact, I had 2 students at Berkeley who said, well, could we do some experiments, because they were pretty keen on LSD. Well, I wasn't to sanction LSD, and it wasn't sort of a thing to do on campus at the time. It was in between riots, the People's Park and the freedom of speech riots. It wasn't the sort of time to endorse drug taking. However, I said that if you just look at a fan rotating with a light behind it, you can get mad on that just as well instead of taking drugs. And indeed, a couple of students did that and found it did send them and gave them a trip. Okay, somewhat cheaper, certainly legal. Okay. Now, the bottom here is just a simple thing of me and a friend in an elevator. Now, how many of you people have experienced elevator travel and be conscious of what happens? When do you perceive motion? It's when you start off, when it slows down, or when it jerks. So the correlation with our sensory responses is the change. It's the change in stimulus that gives us our sensory responses. Now, the thing that I want to get across tonight to you is that our perceptions of our environment depend on the change in stimulus, and this is the vitality of design. It's the change in temperature, it's the change of air over a surface, it's the change in light pattern. That's the essence of design. If you want a person to sense an environment, you've got to produce change. And that's the guts of design for people. If you want people to notice the environment about you, to be a part of that environment, you need a change in stimulus. You've got to provide a stimulus. And the relationship of that is the change. So, we're interested in accelerations. The change in acceleration in an elevator, because that was the correlation. Now we got into other things with regards to, this happens to be just a school environment up in Canada. It's a top luminous ceiling. Now unfortunately I can't duplicate the high luminous values of that ceiling on this projector. But imagine a thing about 5 times as bright as that surface, and you'll get the idea. Now what happens with a surface like that is, if the bottom one has got the chalkboard, here's another case. Here are people having a lecture. Okay. You have a chalkboard which is dark colour and a light, and you have this highly luminous ceiling. Well, it's a very good case of phototropism. Orientation towards light. First of all, you look at the board. The top half of the visual field is asymmetrically luminous. You tend to look towards that. You look into it, you adapt, and you tend to look into it again, the next fixation in the visual field. Then there's nothing in the visual field of light at that point when you're looking up into that luminous area. There is nothing to bring your eye down to the board again. So this is a very distracting type of luminous environment for this type of task. And yet it's becoming a fairly popular medium in some cases for lighting a space. So I'm bringing up that, and that can be analysed, and I don't mean mathematically, it can be analysed in terms of the discussion I've just made. And you can go into a space and empirically validate it yourself, because it's self-evident after a while, once you understand what to look for. In fact, after a course from me, you almost can't look at anything. You don't know what to design for, because it creates so many things in an environment. So after a while, what you do is you look for the opportunities in design. I've been bothered a lot of the time to try and analyse the constraints, to try and stop people from extending the limits beyond. And when I take on the guise of the designer, I take the other. I don't take the limiting values, I take the things that complement the activities that are going on. Okay, so we have this range of criteria that we're dealing with. Okay. Okay, now acoustical environment. Now the common thing nowadays you'll find is the open plan office. We've had, well, that's a little bit how we got together. We have 2 schools of thought. We have basically the problem of privacy. In other words, you create a quiet environment, you don't have any sound in it at all. So whenever you utter a sound, it's absorbed by the environment. So that means the only things that you can hear is between you and another person at close distance, because the rest of the environment will absorb that sound. That's dead acoustically. Okay, that's one way to go. The other extreme is to have a highly reverberant, so that whenever I talk, I get so much reverberation that it echoes back, but I can't hear myself, and nobody else can hear you. So that's privacy, but it's not articulation of the communication in a space. So we've got the articulation of communication in a space as one range of problems, and the other range is privacy. Now, it's a matter of what is the situation. If you're in a conference, you don't want privacy. I don't want privacy with you, for instance. I want to talk with you. Unfortunately, there's not much of an exchange because we're not in a situation for interactive exchange. Because if you said anything, I could hardly hear you. So this environment is good for your privacy. This environment here, through this, gives me the communication. So there is a school of thought in office design that says, let's make everything absorbent. The ceiling. Make all the luminaires small so they don't reflect sound. Make all the partitions absorbent so whatever I say it doesn't go anywhere. And to top the lot, you put in a masking sound in the plenum, that's the airspace above the ceiling. And you let it hiss with what we call pink sound. And so we've got this sort of hum in the background that we can't perceive unless we turn it off, and my gosh, you can hear the difference then. So these are the questions that you will have as designers to decide in the future which way you want to go. There's no one there who's going to tell you which is the right or the wrong way. What will happen is the consultant will ask you, if you want privacy, these are the solutions. Masking sound, absorbance, surfaces, and that. Then you start to run back in your mind, well, do I really want that? And so it's this reiteration of creativeness on your part that will be important in the future. Because in many cases you will not need these other contrivances to control the environment, particularly putting in background hissing sound. All right? Or music. Okay. Now, one of the things in an environment I would like you to not overlook. I'm not saying that this is the perfect environment. What I am saying is the sensitivity of understanding what is going on. We tend to have lost the human sensitivity of the materials that we use in design customarily. Now, the one here that's important is a curtain. A curtain is quite an interesting device. The curtain has a method of diffusing light. It's a very important quality. It provides colour to the environment with the transmission of light reflected through the fabrics. It also acts as a screen between the privacy of the person inside and those who are viewing from the outside. You remember the old houses and the you remember the old films and so on, where you'd have people in the lace curtains and the old ladies peering through them and people poking fun at that social gesture. But I'm saying that that's not so funny, it's an important thing in life. To understand the relationship between privacy and what we can do in design to create it. And I'm saying that perhaps there are simpler ways than reflective film on the outside of glass like we're getting on some of our buildings. Now, the reflective film cuts down some heat radiation, and this is the argument that is used. And it also cuts down the glare from the sky for the people inside. But what about the people outside? Have you looked at the grass lately? You see it burnt up in some cases. I've seen cases outside the reflective curtain wall buildings where the grass has actually been singed because of the heat reflected from that sun. And in particular instance, there's a curved facade concentrating the sun. So it can become a fire hazard. Okay. But what about people going past, outside the building? You're designers, and I think that you should be responsible for outside your building just as much as inside. And therefore, not only do you consider that the thing that a marketer might come along and say, a manufacturer might come along, here, use this for heat control. And another one will say, well, you also control the light. Then, as an architect, you want to start saying, yes, now, what else does it create? What does it create inside the space? What does it create to the environment outside? To people, to plants, what have you? And it's those questions I want to pose to you to try and open up opportunities in design. Because if you want to focus light and put a collector there to absorb energy, fair enough. That's the premise for that sort of a design. But if you're going to stick a human being there, it's not. And indeed, this is what's happening with some of our solar passive houses. They're going forward on the premise of design that we're absorbing heat into those spaces. For them to work as a heat machine, they need to be in 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, I'd love you to work in that. We complain about being in the 80s and 90s now, but try and work in a passive home that's collecting energy at that temperature and consider that a habitable space. So the key thing in that particular case is that you have to control it to your ends. One to collect energy, the other is a separate issue of making it a habitable space. And indeed, if you review the solar demonstration of the HUD programs, then the passive design is not too successful overall because of the lack of appreciation of the habitability of those spaces for people. They're okay as greenhouses. They're humidity producers in that case. What can you do with hot, humid weather? Gosh, ventilate. And I've been discussing this afternoon with some students. Our basic control is ventilation. Blow it out of the air. And at the passive home in summertime, you might want to just conceive of it as sensible design and not collect any energy at all in that phase. And just think of the earth berms and the subterranean cavities you're creating as insulation rather than of collecting energy for any useful purpose. Now, going back to visual design again, this I think is almost the ultimate in task lighting. People talk about task lighting, and the question is, do you illuminate, say, an office space or something else, what have you, by ceiling luminaires, or do you use luminaires that are down closer to the task? Now, the basic question here is the direction of your light. The problem is that if you put light forward you get reflected light. And the best test that I've come across, not using ESI, the equivalent sphere illumination, all these other modern measurements that we're coming across, rather than using that, just take seat of the pants approach in lighting. That is, imagine the surface as a sheet of glass. So if the book's a curved book, imagine it as a surface of glass. If you see a light or any luminous area, it could be daylight from outside or the luminaire above, if it's too glaring in your eyes, reflected in that surface, then it's not good design. And either you shift the task or you shift the luminaire, or you shift the person out. Those are your alternatives. But it's sensible design. It's not a question of elaborate measurement. It's getting a sense for what you're doing. The sensory business of understanding how people see their tasks, perceive it, hear it, and so on. Now, I'd like to discuss very briefly some of the thermal issues. The particular office I have been working with has proposed the problem of, if you've got an air conditioning system, through the luminaires which cool it and then recirculate it to a central plant. It takes a lot of energy in fan power to drive that air around. So that there are some engineers who are advocating, instead of treating all their energy in central plant, just treat the outside air that you're bringing in, the fresh air, if you can get it. Treat that first, and then recirculate locally with fans, terminal fans. So the people I'm working with, they've got a mania about terminal fans. I'm not quite so driven that way. I prefer to think of it as, say, at least into a zone rather than into small groups, because it's a matter of some other questions which I'll just raise in a moment. But if you do recirculate the air locally and you put cooling coils locally, then it brings the energy problem down to where you need the cooling and where it's needed, and you don't have to distribute it all throughout the building. Now, this is the problem with your passive design. You're bringing in energy in one part and you've got to distribute it. And what is happening is you're not considering the energy of distributing it over the building. And if you consider that energy in fan power and other sorts of mechanical contrivances, you'll probably find it might not be worth it. And those are the points that we will have to evaluate. Because as designers, that whole building is important to us. An engineer, you would get the problem of the energy in the mechanical equipment. And you would have to ask him specially about those other points. Because he's not concerned about it. He's interested in distributing air, heating and cooling it, and air conditioning. So understand what your consultants are doing. And in this particular case, it is interesting to have this principle of saving energy. In fact, we are, well, I won't go into the energy issues. I want to keep it more into the human responses in this lecture. So, now we have the so-called comfort envelope that is the American Society of Heating and Refrigerating Engineers. First of all, started off with this comfort envelope in here. Then some more experiment and a little bit of energy conservation coming in, brought it out to here. Then Rose and some others, and indeed some Australian researchers in sympathy with bringing it out into this. In other words, people who are climatized to a warmer, humid climate can tolerate it more if they become acclimatized. Climatization is different from adaptation, by the way. Climatization, it takes a year or two to adjust the human system to that arrangement. But the key thing is that we are getting into difficult problems now. We're sensing humidity problems. This is the humidity problem up in this axis. Relative humidity is up in that other direction for those who can read psychrometric diagrams. So the future, we will have to have more concern for humidity. Now, which way we can go? That's based on equivalent temperatures, the so-called comfort. And so the next way we go is to worry about air temperature and air motion. So what we find is with the air motion charts is that we can get humidity feeling relatively comfortable if we increase the air motion over the body as our first control. Now you people have noticed it in terms of you provide a fan in the space. That'll be the next thing. Everybody will be coming in with fans in the studio on the top floor. I warn you people. It's not going to save energy, because that fan power driving for student comfort is going to put a greater bill than for bringing the temperature down the central plant, for a start. The other question is this air motion, there is a limit. Because after a while you'll find your lips start to chat. So you're getting physiological responses that you have to account for. And you get a dryness of the skin when it gets a bit dry. And you feel your skin gets creepy. There are various sensations that you go through. You want to study yourself in a space for a while when you're drafting. It's fascinating, as you're in a hot, humid climate like up there, as you feel yourself getting sweaty and uncomfortable, note the particular responses you get. First of all, it's the clamminess and itchiness over the fingers and hands. It's the uncomfortable. You tend to squirm in your seat and want to move around. Then you're drafting, you find you start sticking to stuff. And then you start dripping all over the place, and you sweat around your neck, and your belly gets wet, and these sort of things, and you start being a physiological mess. Okay, physiological messes. Okay. Now I want to get into the point of how perhaps we can put this lot together. What has been the habit in the building process in the evolution of design is that we start off with a design program. Well, someone's got to present it in the first place. You've got to have a promoter, a client. He presents the ideas. The architect sifts through those ideas and tries and conjures up a program. Then we go through a design. We get our preliminary and we come up with a conceptual design and we go into the preliminary. Then once the preliminary is approved, we go into working drawings. Once the client and the bid and the money's right, we go into construction. Then once it's constructed, it goes into occupancy. And when people have had enough of it in 30 years, they demolish the lot. Or we create a thing called flexible design and we change the partitions around. Now there's another form of flexibility that's going on in the world at the present moment, and that's a miniaturization. Computers are a very good example of it. So what can be happening is that you might keep the same number of people in an environment. You introduce mechanical and electronic contrivances to help them their work, such as memory work and manual work, through a computer or a console of some sort, some display. But the additional thing it's doing is producing heat in that space. So we're creating another problem in our future design, which we have to create a flexibility of air conditioning for the new types of activities that we're going into. These are the sort of challenges that we as designers should be perceiving for the future. So our program has to not only include what a client needs now, but what we think the client will need in 20, 30 years' time. Or perhaps even beyond that if we're soothsayers. Okay. Now, the thing that has been lacking in design evaluation and all this process because of professional pressure, with your own office, you haven't got too much time to consider design in practice. Even in design studio, you haven't got too much time to consider and analyze design to see. But the key thing that is missing in the process at the moment is the reiteration, the working over of alternatives before you get and can gel a concept. We need to provide ourselves with more alternatives in design. We are creating different tasks, different opportunities to express in design today. We've got different problems for the future. We need to seize those opportunities and try and express them in some way, in a viable way, so that our expression can become a living culture with us in a society. That's what design's all about. And we are impoverishing design by not creating alternatives. What we need is to get them out and to go through various levels of discarding or accepting them. The good ones we want to preserve and follow through because they're the vital themes of design. Others we've got to cut out immediately. They might be too energy conserving, too costly, not viable, below water line, or something or others that completely dismisses them. And we shouldn't bring them up again because it's wasteful of our time. We should be spending our time more directively into the positive alternatives of design. So what I have proposed that, and indeed this is happening with some of our energy projects and retrofitting of design, is we're providing a feasibility analysis phase in here, where we have to go into a field survey, or else we review a project in more depth, and we provide more alternatives, not just accept the one that comes forward. We might get the engineer to say, well, are there any more alternatives that I haven't thought of as a designer? Would they be better than what I've got? And this is where you can start utilizing your consultants to more effect. You don't lose control of what you're getting at, but you're helping them help you to create alternatives. And so if we expand that part of the work, we get into a rather complicated and more analytical phase. And we have pursued these analytical phases, if we can get it all on, and we have rather vital inputs. And the vital inputs in design is that if you've got an existing design, you've got to have a field survey before you start. Now, how many of you people have been involved with a field survey and you haven't got enough data to start with? Some people today just got the topography and the map of the community area. You couldn't start without that, because that gives you your landforms of what you're going to create and how you're going to go into design. And we're finding that in some government contracts particularly, they're not even requiring a field survey. And you as a designer have to push the issue of getting out there and finding what there is and reviewing it. And it's quite difficult when you're dealing with field work. Now the other thing is that I've got the alternative systems. Somehow we all have to have a background, and that's what was on that advertisement that was on in the halls. It was energy alternatives, that's what it came from actually, with all those little diagrams around the lecture I'm giving tonight. That's where it came from. It's an idea of giving a checklist for possibilities in energy alternatives in that case. Well, the checklist can also be in terms of lighting design or acoustics or any other design aspect that we consider. We have to have a pool of resources from which we can create. Traditionally, that pool has been by our own personal experiences. The problems of design are getting almost beyond us in some cases, and we need a hand, so we get that consultant. Ask them to give a checklist of alternatives, something or other to get you excited about possibilities in design, without rushing in just straight off to his one pet alternative. And that's what you get with some consultants. They got one way of doing a thing, that's it. You can select that consultant for that purpose if you want to, if you've tried it and you know that type of design is successful. Alternatively, you should check out what other alternatives there might be. Now, the other thing is that cost, when you get into practice, unfortunately, gets a little bit nutty. Traditionally, we've thought of the capital cost, the first cost of creating the building. And we're worried about mortgages, interest rates, and everything like that. Now, with the energy issue coming up, we're trying to trade those first costs with operating costs. In other words, if you reduce the energy consumption, theoretically, you should reduce the cost it takes to run it. Doesn't always happen that way. In fact, with the Social Security Woollen complex, I proposed over 30 alternative scenarios for saving energy on, it's about 1 million square foot job. And then we've done a whole year's study. I came in it at the end because I hadn't joined the firm until late. And I remember very vividly in my mind after this 1 year's study, and we had to complete it and present it all. And it was a life cycle costing test design, and everything had to be justified by life cycle costing. So 1 month before it was due to be submitted, we went through that review, and I told them, I said, do you want to save energy or do you want to save money? And everybody paused, because we had assumed that the energy issue was synonymous with the money issue. It wasn't. We had one scenario that didn't cost any money at all to provide, and yet it would save energy. No, it wouldn't save energy, it would save cost. It was a matter of the bulk rate, combining feeders into the building. No cost, we could save money, but no energy. Now the management was pretty pleased. They accepted that scenario. And so after that, I decided that here we had an independent problem. One was energy, one was capital cost, one was annual costs. You could take any one of those and save each of them independently. But how, as an architect, were you going to think of it overall? So I devised the benefit resource factor analysis, which was a simple arrangement of take a particular parameter like energy, what is it with that active, with the conservation action over what it was, and from probability theory of independent events, if you multiply those together, you get a factor. And if it's less than 1, you're doing better. Or rather, you're doing worse than, and therefore you wouldn't even touch that scenario with a barge pole. If it was greater than 1, in fact, one of them was very good, that's been actioned and it's conserving energy right now. And this convinced the management, and it gave them an objective tool, not just the hearsay of an economist saying it'll save money, the hearsay of another engineer saying it'll save energy. Someone's got to put it all together. Traditionally, that's been the architect. Now, unless we take those responsibilities, there's another alternative. The specifying engineer is another person on the scene who could take those roles. And I have been proposing that those people, if the other professions renege on that responsibility, that that's an area that they will have to take over, the people who specify things in a design. Because they become responsible for what goes on and how things are purchased. And that's what a client's interested in. Okay, so that's the process and how we come up with various conceptual design after iterating and going through these various costing, analysis of energy in this particular case, impact of the environment such as pollution. Do you increase the pollution? Will it pass the codes, the environmental regulations of that locality? And that's becoming a serious one these days. Okay, so now we get to the evaluative process. I don't call it the design process, I call it a process of evaluation. So we've got progressive specifications. A progressive specification is one that follows through from the goals of a design, through defining the parameters that are involved, through stating the models that correlate the parameters, through a setting of the criteria and giving reasons for the criteria that you use to judge the design, through to inspecting. How do you inspect it? Because if you look at the building codes, there's not much guide for a building inspector. And in many cases, it pays to go along with a can of beer, if you're that critical on your design. And, of course, we have test procedures. There's another venture that's creeping up and it's going to affect architects considerably in the future, and that is the thing called performance specifications. It means that instead of specifying a chunk of material and how it's put together, you as a designer will be responsible for its performance once it's created. Now, this is a hang of a responsibility for an architect, because it means that if I design the space and the client insists through this performance specification that this here has to have an illumination of not lower than a certain value, for instance, or the sound pressure level in the space is not to be greater than a certain value with a certain occupancy, or the reverberation of the space is not to exceed another value. And there's another criteria after criteria of performance of that space. And that when the final space is created, and under a performance specification they go in and measure it, and it doesn't meet it, your contract says you've got to make good and make it good. Who pays for it? So the architect then says, oh, Mr. Manufacturer, you didn't give me the stuff to do this. Then you go to the engineer and say, oh, Mr. Engineer, you didn't use the right analytical models to do this. Well, the point is the state of the art is not that precise at the present moment to be able to make those projections. You're now in the field of science, and the science is not sufficiently accurate enough to predict those things to the requirement of many of the performance criteria. And we're starting to find that because of performance criteria in, say, acoustics, the lighting, and this, that, and everything, they're starting to conflict. You find in one moment you're getting it right for the acoustics, and when you design and check through your analytical models, you find that the lighting doesn't work out. You need too small a fixture so as you don't get so much reverberation for the space. It's becoming a nightmare to design with a performance specification. But there are a group of clients who are interested in this approach because they are trying to get a quality product at the end, assuming that the person is going to fit into that environment. Now, my question is, with a number of these performance specifications that are so rigorous that they don't meet the human goals in many cases. Because the specification, the interlock with a human being, is not fully understood. So those type of specifications are becoming one of convenience of purchase for a building. But as designers, we're sort of lumped in between this growing mess. Now, this will be in your future. And I'm trying to present some directions of where there are problems, and that's why I've got this progressive specification to try and bring the human being into it all, so it gives relevance and then we can get continuity through the analysis, through the inspection, through the enforcement, and so on. If we don't have that continuity, that progression of evaluation, then it'll be difficult for all the disciplines involved along the line. That's our challenge, I think, to try and make our evaluation consistent with all the people who are playing. Okay, any questions? Any lines of any exciting anecdotes any of you got to say? It's always hard with questions and answers, this sort of thing. Okay, I guess.